The name on the bounty poster was Silas the Ghost Kane. $1,000 for the man who had vanished into the unforgiving badlands like smoke. For a man like Jedediah, that kind of money was more than a reward. It was a resurrection. Jedediah wasn't a lawman. He was a hunter, a man who traded in the lives of other men his heart as hard and barren as the landscapes he crossed. He tracked the ghost for 3 weeks, following a trail of cold campfires and whispers, until it led him to a place that shouldn't exist. A small hidden cabin tucked into a box canyon, a place the law had never found. He expected to find a hardened killer, a man with cold eyes and a fast gun. He approached the cabin at dawn, his Colt heavy in his hand, every sense on fire. He kicked the door in, ready for a fight, but the cabin was quiet. There was no outlaw. There was only a girl, maybe 17, standing by a cold hearth, clutching a carving knife. She had her father's defiant eyes, but they were filled not with malice, but with a fierce, cornered terror. The cabin held the scent of sickness and recent death. Jedediah had been hired to capture a monster. He never imagined he would find an orphan instead, and that in protecting her, he would be forced to face the monster he had become. Wow, where is he? Jedediah's voice was a low growl, the voice he used for men who were about to die. The girl didn't flinch. She just raised her chin, her knuckles white on the handle of the knife. "He's gone," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. Jedediah's gaze swept the small, clean cabin. He saw the single cot, the empty medicine bottles, the freshly turned mound of earth outside the window, beneath a crude wooden cross. The truth settled on him, cold and unwelcome. The ghost had escaped him in the one way a bounty hunter never could. He had died. The $1,000, his resurrection, had just turned to dust. A bitter frustration rose in him. He looked at the girl, this leftover piece of a life that was no longer worth anything to him. "The law will come for this place now," he said, his voice flat. "They'll take you to a home or a workhouse." He saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly suppressed. She stared back at him, her gaze unwavering. "This is my home," she said. "Jedediah should have left. He should have turned, mounted his horse, and ridden away in search of another name, another bounty." It wasn't his problem. But he found he couldn't move. He looked at her standing there alone against the world and saw not the daughter of an outlaw, but a reflection of a younger, more desperate version of himself. He let out a long, ragged breath, the sound of a man at war with his own instincts. He had come here to take something. But the question that now haunted him was, what in God's name was he supposed to do now? Jedediah didn't leave. He told himself it was practical. The canyon had water, a rare thing in the badlands, and his horse needed rest. He made his camp near the mouth of the canyon, a sentinel at the gate, his presence a silent, looming question. He didn't speak to the girl, and she didn't speak to him. He was the hunter. She was the prey. It was the only language they both understood. He watched her from a distance. She moved with a quiet, self-sufficient grace. She tended a small hidden garden, checked her father's old trap lines, and reinforced the cabin walls with mud and straw. She was surviving, just as he had survived. She was a reflection he didn't want to see. He started leaving things for her. A rabbit he'd shot, left hanging from a tree branch near her path. A new skin of fresh water from the spring. He told himself it was a way to pay for the water his horse was drinking. It was a lie. She in turn began to leave things for him. A bundle of potent herbs for the ache in his shoulder he thought he'd hidden so well. A small pouch of dried berries. It was the same silent barter he had used with trappers and scouts his whole life. But this felt different. It wasn't a transaction. It felt like a confession. One evening as he was cleaning his rifle by his fire, she approached. She didn't come close, just stood at the edge of the firelight, a ghost in the twilight. "You're waiting?" she said. It wasn't a question. "For my horse to heal," he lied, not looking up from his work. "No," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You're waiting for them." She gestured vaguely to the world beyond the canyon. The other hunters, the ones who will follow the same trail you did. Jedediah's hands stilled. She was smart. She knew the way his world worked. She knew her father's death didn't erase the bounty on his name. It just made the prize harder to claim. Someone would come to verify the death to claim the reward, and they wouldn't be as patient as him. They won't care that he's dead, she continued, her voice losing its edge, replaced by a weary resignation. They'll tear this place apart looking for a stash of money that doesn't exist. She faltered, her gaze dropping. They won't see me as a daughter. They'll see me as part of the prize. He finally looked up at her, really looked at her. He saw the defiant strength, but underneath it, he saw the deep, bone-weary terror of a girl who had just lost her only protector and was now facing the wolves alone. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Because he built this place for me," she whispered. "It's the only thing of his that wasn't stolen." She met his gaze, her eyes pleading. "It's all I have left." Her words struck a chord deep inside him, a chord he thought had rusted and snapped years ago. He had spent his life taking things from people, their freedom, their futures, sometimes their lives. He had never once thought about what they left behind. He didn't offer her comfort. He wasn't a man who knew how. Instead, he gave her the only thing he had, his brutal honesty. "They'll come," he said, his voice flat. "2, maybe 3 of them. Men like me, but hungrier, less patient. They'll ride in here thinking they have a claim." He saw her flinch, but she held her ground. "So what do we do?" she asked, and the word "we" hung in the air between them, a fragile, unexpected bridge. Jedediah stood up the firelight, casting his shadow, long and menacing. But for the first time, his presence didn't feel like a threat to her. It felt like a shield. "We make sure they find nothing worth staying for," he said. The next 2 days they worked. A strange, unspoken alliance formed between the hunter and the outlaw's daughter. He showed her how to erase the tracks leading into the canyon, how to use brush and rock to make the entrance seem like nothing more than a dead-end rock slide. He was teaching her how to disappear, the greatest skill a bounty hunter possessed. In turn, she showed him the secrets of the cabin. She pulled up a loose floorboard, revealing a small, hollow space. It didn't contain gold or money. It contained a worn, leather-bound book filled with her mother's drawings of plants and birds and a small tin-type photograph of her as a small child, smiling, sitting on her father's knee. "This is the stash," she said quietly. It was all the treasure she had. He helped her pack these few precious things into a satchel. Then together they did the hardest thing. They made the cabin look like it had been abandoned for years. They scattered dust, broke a chair, and tore a curtain. They were destroying her home in order to save it. As they worked, he learned her name was Elspeth. He learned her father wasn't a killer, just a rustler who had stolen from the rich cattle barons who had cheated him first. He was a man who had made bad choices, but who had loved his daughter enough to build her a sanctuary from the world. On the 3rd day, as they finished their work, they heard it, the distant sound of approaching horses. They were coming. Jedediah grabbed his rifle. Elspeth grabbed her own. They retreated to a high ledge overlooking the canyon entrance, 2 silent figures hidden in the rocks, waiting for the wolves to arrive. 3 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Jedediah recognized them immediately. Barlow, a hulking man with a cruel streak, and the Pike brothers, wiry and rat-like scavengers who always followed the scent of a kill. They were exactly the kind of men he had expected. They paused, surveying the rock slide that seemed to block the way. "Trail goes cold here?" one of the Pikes grumbled. "The hell it does," Barlow snarled. He was a better tracker. He dismounted and began examining the ground. Jedediah felt Elspeth tense beside him, her knuckles white on a rifle. "Easy," he murmured, his voice a low breath. "Not yet." Barlow found the signs. They had deliberately left the faint scuff marks leading through a narrow, hidden path. With a triumphant shout, he led the others into the canyon. They rode in their eyes, scanning everything hungry and predatory. They found the cabin and kicked the door in just as Jedediah had. From their vantage point, Jedediah and Elspeth watched as the men tore the cabin apart. They ripped up the floorboards, smashed the meager furniture, and emptied the cupboards. Their frustration grew with every empty corner. "Nothing," one Pike brother spat, kicking over the table. "The ghost must have buried it outside." They moved to the fresh grave, their greed overriding any respect for the dead. Barlow drew his pistol. "He ain't gonna need it where he's going." He laughed and fired a shot into the wooden cross, shattering it. A choked gasp escaped Elspeth's lips. A single hot tear of rage and grief rolled down her cheek. Her rifle shifted the barrel, aligning with Barlow's back. Jedediah's hand shot out, not grabbing the rifle, but gently covering hers. "No," he whispered, his voice firm but not unkind. "This isn't your fight. It's mine." He had brought this trouble to her door. It was his duty to end it. He rose from the rock, stepping into plain view on the ledge above them. "Looking for something, Barlow?" He called out, his voice echoing in the canyon. The three men spun around, their guns instantly drawn. Their surprise turned to suspicion. "Jedediah," Barlow growled. "What are you doing here? This is our claim." "You have no claim," Jedediah said, his rifle held loosely at ease. "The ghost is dead. I saw the body before I buried it. There's no money. There's nothing here for you." "Liar," a Pike brother shouted. "You're trying to keep it all for yourself." "Think what you want," Jedediah said calmly. "But this canyon is empty. It's a dead end. Time for you to leave." Barlow's eyes narrowed, scanning the rocks. He was a predator, and he could sense something was wrong. He could sense another presence. "Who's that with you, Jedediah?" he sneered. "Got yourself a partner, or maybe you found the girl." This was the moment, the choice. Jedediah could have cut a deal. He could have saved his own skin. But he looked at the shattered grave marker, thought of the girl hiding in the rocks behind him, and a lifetime of self-interest burned away. He raised his rifle, the movement slow and deliberate. "There is no girl," he said, his voice as cold and final as a tombstone. "There's only me, and I'm telling you to ride out, now." The canyon held its breath. It was 3 guns against 1. Barlow stared up at Jedediah, weighing his options. He saw the cold certainty in Jedediah's eyes, the way he held his rifle, not like a man hoping for a fight, but like a man who had already decided its outcome. Barlow knew Jedediah's reputation. He was methodical, relentless, and he didn't miss. A fight here in this closed-in space against a man on high ground was a fool's game, and there was no guarantee of a reward. "This ain't over, Jedediah," Barlow spat, but the threat was hollow. He holstered his pistol. "Let's go. This place is picked clean." He mounted his horse, and with a final hateful glare, he and the Pike brothers rode out of the canyon, leaving a wake of destruction and defeated greed. Jedediah waited until the sound of their horses had completely faded. He lowered his rifle, the tension draining from his shoulders. He turned. Elspeth was emerging from the rocks, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. She was holding the small tin-type photograph of her and her father. It was the only thing from the cabin she had kept with her. She walked up to him, stopping just before him. "You lied for me," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "They weren't owed the truth," he said gruffly. "You could have been killed," she insisted. "For nothing, for me." "It wasn't for nothing," he said, and he was surprised by the truth in his own words. For the first time in his life, he had chosen to protect something not hunted. The feeling was strange, heavy, but clean. They walked down to the ruined cabin together. The destruction was absolute. The home her father had built for her was gone. She stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumping in grief, but then she looked at the grave, at the shattered cross. With a new resolve, she knelt, picked up the splintered pieces of wood, and began to fit them back together. Jedediah watched her for a moment, then went to his horse. He unstrapped his bedroll and his saddlebags. He dropped them on the ground near the cabin's foundation. It was a quiet, definitive act. Elspeth looked up, her hands still on the broken wood. "What are you doing?" "A man needs a place to stay," he said simply. "And this cabin, it looks like it could use some mending." A slow smile, the first he had ever seen, spread across her face. It was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. She didn't have a home anymore. Neither did he. But as they stood there amidst the ruins, surrounded by the silent protective walls of the canyon, they both knew they weren't alone. The bounty hunter had come to the canyon to claim a prize. He had failed, but in doing so, he had found something far more valuable. He had found his own humanity reflected in the eyes of an outlaw's daughter. And together, they would build a new sanctuary from the dust, not as a hunter and his prey, but as partners, as survivors, as a beginning.